Previously,
Instead, they paired their old Essex-class ships with a much different beast, but that's a story for another day.
I'm going to ask a simple question. What is the fastest aircraft you can operate from a World War II era carrier? I mean, those things are designed to take prop-driven stuff, and the fastest prop-driven thing will maybe do 500 miles an hour. Now, the Brits once operated Phantom IIs that could do 3 times that speed from their old carriers, but they had to extensively modify both their Phantom IIs and their carriers, and that's basically cheating. Today I will be talking about an aircraft that didn't cheat all that much. Let's just start with the basics. Any car guys around here? You know Lancias? Lancia was an Italian automaker. They used to make some pretty spicy cars back in the day, including, but not limited to, a pocket-sized rally machine, a pocket-sized mid-engined rally machine, a full-sized mid-engined rally machine, and a single hottest hatchback known to man. Sounds great, right? Well, Lancias, as spicy as they were, all had issues. Simply put, there is no such thing as a boring Lancia, but there is no such thing as a sane, regular, dependable Lancia either. But what does any of this have to do with planes? Well, you see, I think that Vought is the Lancia of fighter plane business. Take their most recognizable product, for instance, the Corsair. The Corsair was a great aircraft, both visually striking and immensely powerful. Its only real drawback was the fact that it couldn't really land on a carrier. Of course, there have been many great airplanes that weren't carrier capable. It's just that, Vaught's biggest customer for the Corsair was the US Navy. Not to worry though, the Brits got their hands on the Corsair through Lend-Lease and they tinkered with it. And by about 1943, the Corsair had become carrier capable. Despite all its quirks and failings, from the crooked wings to the difficult deck landings, Corsair became one of the most successful single-engine fighters of its generation. And then the war ended, and people moved on to jets. Vaught's first jet, the Pirate, flew in 1946. It was, abysmal really. The engine was quite underpowered, so Vought gave it an afterburner. This could have worked well, but you see, Vought, being innovative of course, had built the airframe out of, biopolymer composites, let's just say. Guess what happened next? That's right, the Navy bought Grummons. Okay, so before moving on, I'd like to talk about this one thing. In the immediate aftermath of the war, there was a trend toward smaller carrier fighters. Just look at Grumman. They followed up on their excellent Hellcat with the smaller, lighter Bearcat. This is very much a result of carrier versus carrier warfare in the Pacific. The side that can pack more planes on their carriers had a natural advantage. Planes such as the Fury and the Pirate came out of this thinking. As the Cold War progressed, the Soviet Bomber Command replaced Japanese carrier groups as the main threat towards US carriers. The epic missile slinging stuff that we tend to remember came out of that later era. So in short, US naval fighter design went from anti-kamikaze swarm to long-range missile slinger. Speaking of missile slingers, as the Navy was busy using the few remaining pirates for target practice, Vought unveiled its newest creation, the Cutlass. And it was somehow even worse. Its engines were underpowered, its combat range was short, it couldn't really carry any bombs under the wings, gas from the guns choked the engines, Mikoyan style, and the landings were, fatal. Over its very short career in the Navy, it cost the lives of over 20 aviators. Navy squadrons would routinely leave their cutlasses on land since having a cutlass on deck posed a significant health and safety hazard. In the end, the Navy did the reasonable thing and bought Grummons. So by the mid-50s, Vought had lost both the straight-wing and the swept-wing naval jet contracts to Grumman. And then Grumman sold a supersonic jet to the US Navy. Now, the Tiger was a pretty neat little jet, and Grumman was trying to market an upgraded version to various European air forces. I mean, how could Vought compete with that? It's not like they had a supersonic jet fighter just waiting in the wings, right? Well, we can finally start talking about the Crusader. Let's start with the Modur. One would assume that the record-breaking 1,000 mile an hour capable jet fighter has some seriously powerful engine, but nope. It's got the engine from the Super Sabre, twin-spool J57. Of course, you could say that the Crusader is a lighter, smaller plane, but nope. These two planes are of similar size and use the same engine, but the Crusader is a bit faster. I don't know. North American skill issue, I guess. Furthermore, the Crusader didn't have the weird instability and uncontrollability problems that plagued the Hun. Later model Crusaders even had these fins added to the bottom of the fuselage with the express purpose of combating instability. Yaw coupling is scary business. I might talk about it one day. So I think we've established that the engine wasn't what made the Crusader special. So let's talk about aerodynamics. Okay, aerodynamics are just like a lot of other things in life based on trade-offs. High speed versus low speed handling, high altitude versus low altitude handling, maneuverability versus stability, etc. This is terrible news for anyone trying to design a carrier-capable fighter. Fighters must handle well at high speeds. Fighters must be maneuverable. The way you do this is you make the wing as thin as possible and mount it as low as possible. Classic example, the Spitfire. Very thin wing, mounted very low. Now, on the other hand, carrier operations require good, stable handling at slow speeds and a short takeoff and landing distance. This is the part where I talk about the ground effect. When a low-wing aircraft comes in to land, the airflow is trapped between the wing and the ground. So, low-wing aircraft must ride this air cushion during the last part of the landing. This means longer landing distances. There's a great video here on YouTube where a glider pilot rides this air cushion for a mile straight. The aircraft just refuses to land. This is very cool and all, but if your plane does this during a deck landing, well, get ready to swim. Have you ever noticed how all the aircraft that are meant to do short takeoffs and landings have wings mounted way up? Well, a high-mounted wing creates very little cushioning, so these planes can land very quickly. A high-mounted wing is also great for stability. All the heavy stuff is at the bottom. Now let's look at the Crusader. Unlike any other fighter of its time, the wing is mounted high up. This is great for deck landings, well done vote. Also notice these things. This is what is known as dogtooth. The idea is that these notches create a deliberate split in the airflow, so the poor airflow at the tip of the wing doesn't ruin the rest of the wing's airflow. Earlier jets, like the Hun and the Cougar, just had these big old fences that ran across the wing for the same purpose. Now, one last point of note. The wing is very thin. This is great for high speeds, but let's look at another speed demon. Now, a thin wing can still make a lot of lift if you angle it right. As a result, Concorde, with its very high-speed wing, had to land with its nose pointed way up, so high up that the pilots couldn't see the ground. This problem was solved by making the nose of the plane fall down during landings. In short, the snoot had to droop. Now, this is an acceptable solution for an airliner, but the Crusader carries a search and track radar in the nose. The snoot cannot droop. The designers at Vought came up with a unique solution. Why angle the entire plane when you can just angle the wing itself? Thus, the Crusader became the first jet in the US Navy to have variable geometry wings. Note that this isn't the same as the epic variable sweep stuff that came later. This is variable incidence. The wing tilts up during landings in a sort of shrug position. With this arrangement, the Crusader could make a near horizontal landing approach at quite low speeds. This is excellent for deck landings. Let's take a step back and look at the overall package. This is a supersonic jet fighter that can operate from World War II era carriers. You understand how insane that is, right? The first Essex-class carriers were designed for prop-driven fighters that could do maybe 500 miles an hour. The Crusader can do twice that, and here it is landing on an Essex class. This is insane. There is this common narrative that the Phantom II was just a brick with powerful engines, that its design was a triumph of thrust over aerodynamics. Now, I find that debatable, but I'll say this. The Crusader's design was a triumph of aerodynamics over engine power. Was it the best airframe of its generation? Well, I think that's another video. Let's talk about the Crusader's weapons. Now, you might have heard the lore surrounding the Crusader. It was the last gunfighter.
He said it! He said it!
So yeah, the Crusader had guns. 4 of them, in fact. Now, you might think you know the 20mm aircraft cannon. Every US fighter after Korea had the same gun armament, right? Wrong. The Navy adopted a weird 20x110mm round after World War II. It's mostly based on the old Hispano Suiza. You know the one. Here's a Corsair armed with it, and here it is on the Hellcat. Now, the Air Force adopted a 20x102mm round. That one was based on the late World War II Mauser revolver cannon. That round would later be used in the 6-barrel Vulcan gun. The Vulcan became very common, and the Navy eventually started using it. The Tomcat had a Vulcan. But wait a second. The Tomcat was introduced in 74, and the Crusader wasn't retired until 76. So I guess the carriers had to carry both 20x110 and 20x102 ammo for their fighters for 2 years. I'm sure it was a very straightforward process and no one mixed up the ammo. And don't forget the Oerlikon light AA guns on deck. Those used 20x110 rebated rim, so it wouldn't work in the Navy 20mm guns. See, it's very straightforward stuff here. Now, air-to-air gunfire is tricky. At jet speeds, you have a very short window to shoot. So we want 3 things in an aircraft gun: high rate of fire, high muzzle velocity, and high projectile weight. With a high rate of fire, even the shortest burst delivers a lot of lead. With a high muzzle velocity, you don't have to lead the target as much. And of course, a high projectile weight means each round packs a punch. I'd say that having 4 gas-operated 20mm cannons firing in parallel ticks all 3 boxes. Is it the best way to do it? Well, we'll get there. Moving on, let's talk missiles. The Crusader could carry 4 short-range Sidewinder missiles. First things first, how do you mount guided missiles on an aircraft with a variable geometry wing? Well, you don't mount the missiles on the wings. There are various ways to avoid doing that, and Vought decided on chic hardpoints either side of the fuselage, just aft of the cockpit. With these, the Crusader could carry 4 Sidewinders. Throughout its service life, the Crusader would carry 3 different flavors of the Sidewinder: the 9B, the 9C, and the 9D. Let's start with the 9B. The B was, well, it was an old piece of shit. A reliable piece of shit, I might add. China Lake really took the old Toyota pickup truck approach with the B. No frills, nothing to go wrong. Air-cooled infrared sensor, no off-bore sight, no radar cueing, no CCM, strictly rear aspect. I feel pretty confident that the 9B is thoroughly obsolete as of the making of this video, but back in the late 50s it was a perfectly decent weapon. Mind you, the Soviets were still flying piston engine bombers. Against such a lumbering target, the 9B would be pretty effective, unlike some other missiles I could mention. Anyways, the US Navy wanted to improve the reliable but modest B, so China Lake came up with the 9D, sleeker nose, better rocket motor, semi-solid state circuitry as opposed to the 9B, which had no solid state components. Modern all-solid state systems were still a few years away. But never mind that, let's talk about the huge tank of refrigerant in the room. So if you were designing a heat-seeking missile, you'd make sure that the heat sensor is nice and cool and sensitive, right? Well, the 9B's sensor was air-cooled, but the 9D's sensor was cooled by refrigerant. Basically, you have a tank of, well, gas on the launching aircraft, and you run this cool gas through a hose, through the missile hardpoint, and into the missile itself, cooling down the sensor. This is an effective setup and is still used in heat-seeking missiles today. Aside from the improved flight performance and sensor cooling, the 9D didn't offer that much of an advantage over the 9B. I mean, it was way better than the 9B, no doubt, but it was still a rear aspect only missile. The quest for an all-aspect Sidewinder would lead the Navy and China Lake to very weird places. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the 9C. The 9C was the only Sidewinder variant that was radar guided. It was only carried by the Crusader, which, you see, the Crusader got updated with a brand new radar set in 1960, the AN/APQ-84. Don't worry about the name, I'll make a video on what radar names mean one day. But here's the problem. The 84 didn't have continuous wave illumination. So if you think about how, say, the Sparrow works, the launching aircraft continuously shines a radar beam at the target until the missile arrives at that target. The 84 didn't do that, and the 9C had to be guided by radar pulses rather than a continuous signal. terminal. This is not great. The missile has to play connect the dots in flight. The Navy would later combine this technology with other missile technologies, but that's a story for another day. Let's talk about another problem with the AT-4. It had no look-down capability. So in theory, a 9C could be fired at a target from any angle, front, rear, left, right, bottom, but not from above, because the radar couldn't tell a target flying at a low altitude from the ground beneath it. Apart from these glaring problems, the 9C was similar to the 9B. So before moving on, let's do a short rundown of the Crusader's missile options. 9B is the old rear aspect heat seeker. 9D is newer and improved, but still rear aspect only. And the 9C is radar guided and all aspect, but not really. A true all aspect sidewinder would not be available until well after the Crusader's retirement. So I've talked about the engine, the airframe, and the weapons of the Crusader. Join me next time when I'll be talking about its combat record and how it became the last gunfighter.